At 9:34 in the morning on April 18, 1943, Major John Mitchell checked his wristwatch and looked up through the canopy of his P-38 Lightning. The jungle coast of Bougainville lay ahead, exactly where it should be. Mitchell had just navigated 435 miles across open ocean at 50 feet altitude, using nothing but a compass, his watch, and dead reckoning. He was 1 minute early. Then he saw them. Two small dots descending through light haze at 4,500 feet, heading south down the coastline. Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers. Right on schedule. 6 Zero fighters flew escort 1,500 feet above in two V formations of 3 aircraft each. The entire Japanese formation was proceeding exactly as the intercepted message had predicted, unaware that 16 American fighters had flown the longest interception mission ever attempted to kill one man. Mitchell keyed his radio. Bogies. 11 o'clock high. The lead bomber carried Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet, the architect of Pearl Harbor, the man who had personally planned the attack that killed over 2,000 Americans and brought the United States into the war. In 3 minutes, Yamamoto would be dead, shot down by a pilot he would never see, flying an aircraft that should not have had the range to be there. What happened next would demonstrate something the Japanese High Command had failed to understand. American technology and industrial capacity could reach anywhere the Japanese believed themselves safe. The mission that killed Yamamoto wasn't just an assassination. It was proof that there was no place in the Pacific beyond American reach, no target too distant, no leader too protected. The war Japan thought it could control by controlling distance had just fundamentally changed. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Understanding how this mission became possible requires going back 4 days to April 14th, 1943. At multiple American radio intercept stations scattered across the Pacific, operators copied a Japanese naval message transmitted from Rabaul in the early morning hours. The message stood out immediately because of the number of addressees. It was encoded in Japanese naval cipher JN25D. But the Americans had broken that code months earlier. The message was forwarded to Fleet Radio Unit Pacific at Pearl Harbor, known as Station Hypo or FRUPAC. Navy cryptographers went to work immediately. Among them was a young officer who would later become Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens. The message took hours to fully decrypt. When the translation was complete, it revealed something extraordinary. A detailed travel itinerary for Admiral Yamamoto. The message stated that on April 18th, Yamamoto would depart Rabaul at 600 hours Tokyo time in a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber. He would fly to Balalai Airfield on an island near Bougainville in the Solomon Islands. Arrival time was scheduled for 800 hours Tokyo time. The flight would consist of 2 Betty bombers carrying Yamamoto and his staff, escorted by 6 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters. The message even specified the exact route and timing. It was the kind of intelligence that appears once in a war, perfect information delivered with enough advance notice to act on it, but not so much time that plans could change. Commander Edwin Layton, Pacific Fleet Intelligence Officer, brought the decrypted message to Admiral Chester Nimitz at Pearl Harbor. Layton knew Yamamoto personally from his time as naval attaché in Tokyo before the war. He understood Japanese culture and military thinking better than almost any American officer. Nimitz read the message and asked the critical question. Do we try to get him? Would the Japanese be able to replace him with someone better? Layton's assessment was unequivocal. No other Japanese admiral possessed Yamamoto's combination of strategic vision, combat experience, and standing among the Japanese people and military. His loss would devastate Japanese naval morale, already shaken by defeats at Midway and Guadalcanal. Other admirals had technical ability, but none matched Yamamoto's reputation or leadership. There was another consideration. Yamamoto had become the symbol of Japanese aggression in American public perception. He was blamed, rightly, for planning the Pearl Harbor attack. Getting Yamamoto would be both a military and propaganda victory. It would prove to the American people that those responsible for Pearl Harbor would be held accountable. Revenge was not official policy, but it motivated everyone involved. The decision went up the chain of command. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox may have been consulted. Some sources claim President Franklin Roosevelt himself gave approval, supposedly responding simply, "Get Yamamoto." Whether those specific words were spoken is uncertain, but the order was clear. Admiral Yamamoto was to be killed. The authorization came back down to Nimitz, who passed it to Admiral William Halsey, commander of U.S. forces in the South Pacific area. Halsey gave the mission to Rear Admiral Mark Mitchell, Commander Aircraft Solomons, known as Commersols. The task force included Navy, Marine, and Army Air Forces units operating from Guadalcanal. Mitchell examined the intelligence and immediately recognized the problem. Distance. Bougainville was approximately 400 miles from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. The actual interception point to catch Yamamoto's flight would be even farther, perhaps 435 miles. Depending on the exact route, the mission would require flying over 800 miles round trip. No margin for error. No time to search. The intercepting fighters would need to arrive at exactly the right place at exactly the right time, or Yamamoto would land safely, and the opportunity would be lost forever. Navy F-4F Wildcats based on Guadalcanal had insufficient range. Marine F-4U Corsairs, newer and more capable, still couldn't make the distance. No carrier was close enough to launch a strike. Only one aircraft type in the theater could fly that far and still have fuel to fight. The P-38 Lightning. The P-38 was a twin-engine fighter with a unique configuration. Twin booms extending back from each engine with vertical stabilizers at the rear. A central nacelle housing the cockpit and armament. The design gave it exceptional range for a fighter, but even the P-38's standard range wasn't enough for this mission. The Lightnings would need external drop tanks, large auxiliary fuel tanks mounted under the wings that could be jettisoned when empty or when combat required full maneuverability. The P-38G Lightnings stationed at Henderson Field could be fitted with two external tanks of varying sizes. Standard 75-gallon tanks were available. Larger tanks holding 150 or 165 gallons had been developed but were not common in the South Pacific. For this mission, the P-38s would use the largest tanks available. Even with drop tanks, fuel would be critical. Every mile flown consumed fuel that couldn't be replaced. The outbound route would need to avoid Japanese-held islands, where radar or observers might detect the formation and alert Yamamoto's flight. That meant flying a circuitous path, adding distance. The Americans would fly low over water to stay under Japanese radar coverage. Low-altitude flight consumed more fuel than high-altitude cruise. The entire mission would operate at the edge of the P-38's maximum range. If the navigation was off by even a few miles, if the timing was wrong by even a few minutes, the fighters might miss the intercept entirely and run out of fuel trying to get home. Major John Mitchell of the 339th Fighter Squadron was selected to lead the mission. Mitchell was an experienced P-38 pilot and exceptional navigator. He would need every bit of that skill. The mission plan called for 18 P-38s. 16 would fly the actual mission, with 2 spares in case of mechanical problems during takeoff. Of the 16, 4 would be designated the killer flight, tasked with attacking the bombers directly. The remaining 12 would provide top cover and engage the Zero escorts. Captain Thomas Lanphier was chosen to lead the killer flight. His wingman would be First Lieutenant Rex Barber. 2 additional pilots, Lieutenant Jim McClanahan and Lieutenant Joe Moore, were assigned as backups. The 12 cover aircraft would be led by Mitchell himself, positioned to intercept any Japanese fighters trying to protect the bombers. The mission briefing on April 17th included specific orders. Fly to Bougainville at minimum altitude to avoid detection. Maintain radio silence. Drop external tanks only when engaging the enemy or if combat maneuvering required it. The cover flight was to climb to altitude and engage the Zero escorts, drawing them away from the bombers. The killer flight would stay low and attack the Betty bombers before they could escape or land. One critical detail was debated: should the pilots be told the target was Admiral Yamamoto? Admiral Mitchell decided yes. He believed knowing they were hunting the architect of Pearl Harbor would provide additional motivation. Whether this violated operational security didn't matter. The mission was already so specific that anyone thinking about it would understand a high-value target was involved. The cover story for the source of the intelligence was established. If questioned, the Americans would claim Australian coast watchers had spotted an important high-ranking officer boarding an aircraft at Rabaul and reported it via radio. This was plausible. Coast watchers operating behind Japanese lines throughout the Solomons had provided valuable intelligence throughout the campaign. The cover story was designed to protect the greatest secret of the Pacific War. The Americans had broken Japanese naval codes and could read their encrypted communications. If the Japanese discovered this, they would change their codes immediately, and the intelligence advantage would be lost. The risk of the Yamamoto mission was that the Japanese might realize the interception was too precise to be coincidental. A lone flight appearing exactly when and where Yamamoto would be flying might indicate compromised communications. The Americans decided the risk was acceptable. Killing Yamamoto was worth potentially alerting the Japanese that their codes might be compromised. To mitigate the risk, plans were made to launch additional P-38 raids to the Shortland Islands area in the days following the mission. This would create the impression that the Yamamoto interception was just one of several routine, long-range fighter sweeps, a lucky encounter rather than a calculated assassination. The deception planning showed how carefully the Americans thought through every aspect of the operation. On the evening of April 17th, the 18 selected pilots gathered for final briefing. They learned the route. From Henderson Field, fly south and west out over the ocean, well clear of any Japanese-held islands. Turn northwest, staying low over the water. Approach Bougainville from the southwest, arriving at the intercept point at 9:35 in the morning local time. The entire outbound flight would take approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes, covering well over 400 miles, almost all of it over open water with no landmarks for navigation. Mitchell would navigate using dead reckoning, airspeed, compass heading, and time. He would fly at 50 feet above the ocean to stay under Japanese radar. At that altitude, there would be nothing to see but water and sky. No way to verify position, no way to correct if the calculations were even slightly wrong. Mitchell would have to trust his instruments, his calculations, and his ability to maintain precise course and speed for over 2 hours. The timing had to be perfect. Yamamoto's message specified arrival at Bougainville airfield at 800 hours Tokyo time. That translated to approximately 9:35 local Bougainville time. If the P-38s arrived early, they might have to circle and waste fuel waiting. If they arrived late, Yamamoto would have already landed. The window for interception was perhaps 10 to 15 minutes. Miss that window, and the mission failed. Each pilot was responsible for managing his own fuel. The drop tanks would provide extra range but had to be used carefully. Pilots were instructed to run their external tanks dry before switching to internal fuel. Once on internal fuel, they would have enough to fight briefly and make it home, but only if nothing went wrong. Combat would consume fuel at an enormous rate. High-speed maneuvering, maximum power climbs, and sustained combat could drain tanks in minutes. Every pilot understood that if they got into an extended fight with Japanese Zeros, they might shoot down every enemy aircraft and still not make it home. Fuel would become the enemy as much as the Japanese. At 7:10 in the morning on April 18, 1943, exactly 1 year after the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, the first P-38s began taking off from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. The mission was designated Operation Vengeance. The name was not subtle. This was about revenge for Pearl Harbor as much as military necessity. The Americans wanted Yamamoto dead, and they were willing to risk 18 pilots and 18 P-38s to accomplish it. Almost immediately, the mission began falling apart. Lieutenant Jim McClanahan's P-38 suffered a flat tire during takeoff. He aborted. Lieutenant Joe Moore discovered his drop tanks wouldn't feed fuel to the engines. He aborted. The killer flight had just lost 2 of its 4 aircraft. Only Captain Lanphier and Lieutenant Barber would attack the bombers. 2 fighters against 2 bombers, protected by 6 zeros. The odds had just gotten significantly worse. Mitchell made a command decision. Continue the mission. The cover flight was intact. Lanphier and Barber were both experienced pilots. 2 P-38s, attacking from surprise, might still succeed, where 4 would have been more certain. Turning back meant wasting the intelligence and missing the opportunity. Yamamoto would reach Bougainville safely, and there might never be another chance like this. The formation leveled off at 50 feet above the ocean and turned southwest. 16 P-38 Lightnings, engines roaring, skimming just above the wave tops. Radio silence. No chatter, no transmissions that might alert Japanese listeners, just the sound of 24 Allison engines, and the wind over 16 aircraft driving northwest at 200 and 20 miles per hour. Mitchell flew lead, navigation board strapped to his knee, constantly checking compass heading, airspeed, and his watch. Every minute that passed moved them approximately 3 2/3 miles northwest. Maintain exact heading, maintain exact speed. The mathematics had to be perfect. At this altitude, visibility was limited by the curvature of the Earth. The pilots could see perhaps 10 to 12 miles in any direction before surface features disappeared below the horizon. That meant if they were off course by more than 10 miles when they reached Bougainville, they might not even see the island. They would miss the intercept entirely. The flight droned on. Water. Sky. More water. The monotony was broken only by Mitchell's occasional hand signals to adjust formation or heading slightly. The pilots fought boredom and drowsiness, constant vibration from the engines, constant noise, constant focus required to maintain precise formation and altitude. This was the reality of long-range fighter operations. Hours of tedious flying, punctuated by minutes of terrifying combat. Meanwhile, at Rabaul, Admiral Yamamoto prepared to depart despite warnings from his staff. Junior officers had urged him to cancel the flight, or at least change the schedule. They pointed out that American forces on Guadalcanal might have long-range aircraft capable of reaching this far north. The flight path would take Yamamoto within range of Henderson Field for a brief period. Lieutenant General Hitoshi Imamura, the senior Japanese Army commander in the Solomons, personally described to Yamamoto how he had narrowly escaped being shot down by American fighters just 1 month earlier while flying in the same area. Yamamoto dismissed the concerns. The schedule had been announced. Japanese forces in the area were expecting him. Canceling would damage morale and suggest fear of American capabilities. Yamamoto was known for punctuality. He valued discipline and adherence to schedules. If the message said departure at 600 hours Tokyo time, then departure would be at 600 hours Tokyo time. At the scheduled time, Yamamoto and his staff boarded the first Betty bomber. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff, boarded the second Betty. Both men wore khaki-green Japanese Army uniforms rather than naval dress. This was partly for practical reasons in the tropical heat, partly for consistency with the Army units they would be visiting. 6-0 fighters from the 204th Air Group formed up as escorts. The formation took off from Rabaul at exactly 600 hours Tokyo time and climbed to 6,500 feet. The flight proceeded south down the coast of New Britain, then turned southeast toward Bougainville. The route was direct, approximately 315 miles. Flight time would be roughly 1 hour and 50 minutes. The Zeros positioned themselves in 2 V formations of 3 aircraft each, flying 1,500 feet above and behind the bombers at the 4 o'clock position. Standard escort doctrine. The fighters provided top cover while staying positioned to dive on any threat approaching from the most likely direction, ahead and to the port side. None of the Japanese aircraft had radar. Detection depended entirely on visual observation by lookouts and pilots scanning the sky continuously. At 6,500 feet in light haze, visibility was good, but not perfect. Objects below against the dark ocean would be difficult to spot. The Betty bombers were relatively slow, cruising around 230 miles per hour. They were also large, unarmed transports lacking the defensive armament of combat-configured bombers. If attacked, their only defense would be speed and maneuvering, neither of which would help much against modern fighters. Yamamoto sat in the bomber's passenger compartment, probably reviewing notes for his scheduled inspections. He had just concluded Operation Igo, a major air counteroffensive against Allied positions in the Solomons and New Guinea. The operation had run from April 7th through April 16th. Japanese pilots had reported enormous successes. Dozens of ships sunk, hundreds of aircraft destroyed, enemy positions devastated. Yamamoto believed the operation had been a stunning victory that would boost morale and demonstrate Japanese air power still dominated the region. The reality was very different. Japanese pilot claims were wildly inflated. Actual Allied losses were a fraction of what had been reported. Yamamoto didn't know it yet, but Igo had been a failure that cost Japan approximately 55 aircraft for minimal strategic effect. The inspection tour to Bougainville was intended to congratulate the pilots on their success. Instead, it would cost Yamamoto his life. Back over the ocean, Mitchell's P-38s were approaching Bougainville. 2 hours had passed since takeoff. Mitchell checked his watch, 9:32. Based on his calculations, the intercept point should be approximately 5 to 8 miles ahead. He looked up, scanning the sky. Nothing visible yet. Had he miscalculated? Were they off course? Had Yamamoto's schedule changed? Then at 9:34, 1 minute early by Mitchell's watch, Bougainville's jungle coast appeared ahead through the haze, exactly where it should be. And above the coast, 2 small dots descending from altitude. Mitchell keyed his radio, breaking 2 hours of silence. Bogies, 11 o'clock high. The navigation had been perfect, 435 miles across open ocean with nothing but a compass and a watch, and Mitchell had arrived within 1 minute of the planned intercept time and within visual range of the target. It was one of the most remarkable feats of navigation in aviation history. But the mission had only just begun. Now came the hard part. The actual attack. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Mitchell pulled his P-38 into a climbing turn, leading the 12-cover aircraft upward toward 15,000 feet. The plan was working exactly as briefed. The cover flight would climb and position themselves to intercept the Zero escorts, drawing them away from the bombers. Meanwhile, Lanphier and Barber would stay low and attack the Betty bombers before the Japanese realized what was happening. But the Japanese spotted them. Someone in Yamamoto's formation, probably a Zero pilot with excellent vision, saw sunlight glinting off the P-38s climbing from the ocean. The element of surprise was gone. The 2 Betty bombers immediately nosed down, diving toward the jungle below. The 6 Zero escorts jettisoned their external fuel tanks and split into 2 groups, diving to intercept the American fighters. Lanphier and Barber dropped their external tanks and turned hard toward the bombers, accelerating to full power. 3 Zeros peeled down directly at Lanphier. He made a split-second decision. Instead of trying to evade and continue toward the bombers, he pulled up into the Zeros, meeting them head-on. This was aggressive flying, exactly what Japanese pilots expected from inexperienced Americans. But Lanphier was betting he could scatter them and still get to the bombers. The first Zero flashed past. Lanphier fired a burst. Some witnesses later claimed the Zero exploded. Japanese records show no Zero losses during the mission. Lanphier probably hit the Zero but didn't destroy it. The other 2 Zeros blasted past, then reversed to pursue Lanphier. He was now climbing away from the bombers, engaged with enemy fighters, exactly what the mission plan had told him not to do. Rex Barber continued alone toward the bombers. Both Bettys were diving hard for the jungle, trying to get low where the trees would provide some cover and make gun runs more difficult. Barber banked steeply to follow, momentarily losing sight of both bombers as his P-38 rolled through the turn. When he reacquired visual contact, he was directly behind one Betty at extremely close range, perhaps less than 100 yards. Barber opened fire. The P-38's concentrated nose armament, one 20mm cannon and four 50 caliber machine guns converged on a single point directly ahead of the aircraft. At close range, this firepower was devastating. Barber's first burst struck the Betty's right engine. Pieces flew off the cowling. Black smoke poured from the engine. Barber walked his fire across the fuselage, shells ripping through the thin aluminum skin. The Betty's rear fuselage and empennage were shredded by 50 caliber rounds. The bomber's left engine started smoking. The Betty rolled violently to the left, completely out of control. Barber hauled back on his stick and broke right to avoid collision. The damaged Betty continued rolling left and dove into the jungle below. A massive explosion erupted as the bomber hit the trees. Black smoke rose from the crash site. Barber didn't know it yet, but he had just killed Admiral Yamamoto. The Betty had crashed approximately 1 mile inland from the coast, smashing through jungle canopy before slamming into the ground. The impact was catastrophic, but Admiral Yamamoto was already dead before the crash. Japanese autopsy records later revealed he had been struck by two 50 caliber bullets. One entered through his lower left jaw and exited through his right eye. The other struck his left shoulder. The jaw wound killed him instantly. He was dead within seconds of Barber opening fire, probably from the first burst. Barber didn't have time to confirm the kill. He was already searching for the second Betty bomber. He spotted it, low over the water, off Moyla Point, hugging the waves, trying to escape. Lieutenant Basby Holmes, one of the spare pilots from the killer flight, was attacking it. Holmes had finally gotten his external tanks to release and had joined the fight. His P-38 was firing at the second Betty, but the bomber was still flying. Barber dove toward the second bomber. He lined up astern and opened fire. His shells walked up the fuselage. The Betty's right engine exploded. The bomber tried to ditch in the water, but came apart on impact. The aircraft carrying Vice Admiral Ugaki and several staff officers hit the ocean at high speed. The fuselage broke apart. Ugaki and two other passengers survived the crash, thrown clear into the water. They were rescued hours later by Japanese search parties. The other passengers drowned or died on impact. Meanwhile, above the combat, the 12 P-38s of Mitchell's cover flight engaged the remaining Zeros. The Japanese fighters were outnumbered 2-1, but they fought with desperate aggression. They knew something important had just happened below. The bombers were gone. Their mission to protect Yamamoto had failed. Now they fought to exact revenge and to survive. The air battle spread across several miles of sky. P-38s and Zeros twisted and turned in a chaotic dogfight. The Americans had altitude advantage and numbers. The Zeros had maneuverability at low speeds. The engagement lasted only a few minutes before the Japanese fighters broke off and fled north toward Rabaul. They were outnumbered and low on fuel. Continuing to fight would accomplish nothing except getting themselves killed. During the combat, one P-38 went down. First Lieutenant Raymond Hines' aircraft was hit and crashed into the jungle. Hines was killed. The exact circumstances of his loss remain uncertain. Some accounts suggest he was shot down by Zero pilot Kenji Yanagiya, though Yanagiya never officially claimed a P-38 kill that day. Other accounts suggest Hines may have been hit in friendly fire during the chaotic engagement or crashed due to mechanical failure. Whatever the cause, he was the only American fatality of the mission. The surviving P-38s reformed and turned south toward Guadalcanal. Fuel was now critical. They had been at full power for several minutes during combat. The drop tanks were gone. They were running on internal fuel only, and the flight home was over 400 miles. Some pilots calculated they might not make it. Several P-38s landed at Henderson Field with fuel gauges reading empty, engines coughing as the last fuel drained from their tanks. As the P-38s approached Guadalcanal, Lanfear broke radio silence. His transmission has become famous. "That son of a bitch will not be dictating any peace terms in the White House." The statement was reference to something Yamamoto had supposedly said about dictating peace terms in the White House after defeating America. Yamamoto never actually said those words. The quote was a mistranslation or fabrication, but it captured American anger about Pearl Harbor and satisfaction at getting revenge. The P-38s landed at Henderson Field around noon. Immediately, controversy erupted about who shot down Yamamoto's bomber. Lanphier claimed he had attacked the lead bomber, the one that crashed in the jungle. He reported firing from the bomber's beam and shooting off its right wing before it crashed. He claimed credit for the kill. Barber also claimed he shot down the bomber that crashed in the jungle. His account described approaching from behind, firing into the bomber's engines and fuselage, and seeing it crash. He also claimed credit for shooting down the second bomber over the water. There was no formal debriefing immediately after landing. The pilots were celebrating. Intelligence officers tried to piece together what happened from multiple excited accounts that didn't always agree. The initial intelligence report credited both Lanphier and Barber with shooting down bombers, but couldn't definitively say which bomber carried Yamamoto. That information wouldn't be confirmed until weeks later, when Japanese forces recovered Yamamoto's body from the jungle crash site. The Japanese search party reached the wreckage the day after the crash, April 19th. They found Yamamoto's body still strapped in his seat, thrown clear of the main wreckage but sitting upright. His white-gloved hands still gripped his katana sword. He was described as being in a state of great dignity despite the violence of the crash. The autopsy confirmed the 2 bullet wounds. He had been killed in the air by gunfire, not by the crash. Japanese military leadership was devastated. Yamamoto was irreplaceable. No other admiral possessed his combination of strategic vision, operational experience, and public stature. His death was kept secret for over a month while leaders debated how to announce it. Finally, on May 21st, 1943, the Japanese government officially revealed that Admiral Yamamoto had died in combat during an inspection tour. The announcement shocked Japan. The nation went into mourning. A state funeral was held in Tokyo on June 5th, 1943. It was one of the largest public ceremonies of the war. Part of Yamamoto's ashes were interred at Tama Cemetery in Tokyo. The remainder was sent to his ancestral home in Nagaoka. The Japanese public saw Yamamoto's death as a catastrophic loss. The morale impact was equivalent to losing a major naval battle. The Americans initially kept details of the mission secret to protect the code-breaking intelligence. The cover story about Australian coast watchers was released to the press. For several months, the public story was that the interception was lucky timing, based on spotting Yamamoto boarding an aircraft at Rabaul. In October 1943, Time magazine published an article about Operation Vengeance that mentioned Lanphier by name and revealed details of the mission. The Navy was furious. This was a serious breach of security that could compromise the code-breaking secret. As punishment for the security leak, Major John Mitchell's nomination for the Medal of Honor was downgraded to the Navy Cross. This was the same award given to all pilots who flew the mission. Mitchell's exceptional navigation, which made the entire mission possible, was never properly recognized with higher honors because of anger about the security breach. The controversy over who shot down Yamamoto continued for decades. Lanphier claimed credit loudly and publicly. He gave speeches, wrote articles, and promoted himself as the man who killed Yamamoto. The claim helped his post-war political career. Barber quietly insisted he was the actual shooter, but never pursued publicity the way Lanphier did. Other pilots who flew the mission supported Barber's account. The evidence gradually accumulated in Barber's favor. His P-38 returned to base with 104 bullet holes, evidence of intense combat. The Japanese autopsy showed Yamamoto was killed by bullets from behind, consistent with Barber's account of attacking from the rear. Zero pilot Kenji Yanagiya, who survived the war, testified that he saw the lead bomber shot down from behind by a P-38, exactly as Barber described. An examination of the wreck site showed the bomber's right wing was lying next to the fuselage, not torn off in flight, as Lanphier claimed, but ripped off when the aircraft hit the trees. In 1985, an Air Force review board examined all evidence. and concluded both pilots should share credit, half credit to Lanphier, half credit to Barber. In 1991, another review reached the same conclusion. Lanphier died in 1987, still claiming full credit. Barber continued pressing his case until his death in 2001. In 2003, the state of Oregon officially credited Barber with the sole kill based on crash site analysis and bullet trajectory evidence. The U.S. Air Force never reversed its 1991 decision. Officially, both pilots still share credit. Historians now generally agree that Barber shot down Yamamoto's bomber and deserves full credit. But the official record remains split. The strategic impact of Yamamoto's death is debated among historians. Some argue it was a major blow to Japanese naval leadership and morale. Others suggest it made little difference to the war's outcome because Japan was already losing by April 1943. The industrial and numerical advantages held by the United States would have prevailed regardless of who commanded the combined fleet. But Yamamoto's death demonstrated something psychologically important. American intelligence could penetrate Japanese communications. American aircraft could reach anywhere in the Pacific. Japanese leaders were not safe, even hundreds of miles behind their own lines. The mission proved the P-38 Lightning was the right aircraft for the Pacific War. Its range, speed, and firepower made it ideal for the vast distances of the Pacific theater. The twin-engine configuration provided safety over water. If one engine failed, the pilot could still fly home on the remaining engine. P-38 pilots, Richard Bong and Thomas Maguire, would become the top two American aces of the war, both flying in the Pacific. Bong finished with 40 kills, Maguire with 38. Operation Vengeance remained classified for years after the war. Full details were not publicly released until the 1960s when records were declassified. By then, most participants had left the service. Mitchell, Barber, and the other surviving pilots were living civilian lives. The mission they flew had passed into history as one of the most precisely executed fighter interceptions ever attempted. John Mitchell, who navigated 435 miles across open ocean and arrived 1 minute early, received relatively little recognition. His navigation achievement was extraordinary by any standard, but it was overshadowed by the controversy over who shot down Yamamoto and by the security breach that cost him his Medal of Honor. Mitchell died in November 2005 at age 93. He rarely spoke publicly about the mission. Rex Barber died in July 2001 at age 84, still maintaining he deserved full credit for the kill. His family and supporters continued pressing the case for years after his death. The P-38 he flew on the mission, borrowed from another pilot and nicknamed Miss Virginia, returned to base with over 100 bullet holes, but remained operational. The aircraft was later lost in combat, but photographs of the damaged fighter became evidence in the credit dispute. The wreckage of Yamamoto's Betty bomber still lies in the Bougainville jungle. The crash site has become a tourist attraction. Part of the left wing was removed and taken to the Isoroku Yamamoto Family Museum in Nagaoka, Japan, where it remains on display. One of the aircraft's doors is at the Papua New Guinea National Museum and Art Gallery. The site itself is marked but largely undisturbed, a memorial to one of the Pacific War's most dramatic moments. Admiral Yamamoto's warning about fighting America proved prophetic. He had told Japanese leaders that Japan might achieve victories for six months to a year, but could not win a protracted war against American industrial might. He was correct. Japan's early victories led nowhere. American production overwhelmed Japanese capacity. By April 1943, when Yamamoto died, the outcome was already determined. Japan would lose. The only question was how long the war would continue and how many would die before Japan surrendered. Yamamoto's death changed nothing strategically, but it mattered symbolically. The man who planned Pearl Harbor had been killed by American fighters flying a mission only possible because American codebreakers had broken Japanese communications and American industry had built fighters with the range to reach him. The mission demonstrated everything Japan feared about fighting the United States. American technology, American intelligence, American industrial capacity combining to reach anywhere and strike anyone. On April 18, 1943, 16 P-38 Lightnings flew the longest fighter interception mission of the war. They arrived exactly on time. After navigating over 400 miles of open ocean, they shot down both Japanese bombers. They killed Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, and they proved there was no place in the Pacific beyond American reach. The war Japan started at Pearl Harbor would end with American forces dictating terms in Tokyo Bay. Yamamoto had predicted it. He just didn't live to see it happen. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.